In this video, we uncover the unbelievable tales of 5 cops who took their corruption to the extreme and paid the ultimate price. Starting off today is former officer Daniel Holtzclaw, who was accused of sexual assault involving 12 black women and even a 17-year-old girl from December 2013 to June of 2014. These claims brought attention to the issues of police misconduct.
This is in the District Court of Oklahoma County, State of Oklahoma, the State of Oklahoma versus Daniel K. Holtzclaw, case number CF 2014-5869. Verdict, count 1, sexual battery. We, the jury, impaneled and sworn in the above entitled cause, do upon our oaths find as follows. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and set punishment at 8 years. Count 2, procuring lewd exhibition. Not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. Count 3, burglary in the first degree. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of burglary in the first degree, nor lesser included. Count 4, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 5, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 6, defendant is not guilty of the crime of stalking. Count 7, defendant is not guilty of the crime of sexual battery. Count 8, defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 20 years. Count 9, rape in the first degree. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree. Count 10, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 16 years. Count 11, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree, and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 12, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy. Count 13, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 14, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 15, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 16.
The number of people to come forward and file a complaint against Holtzclaw eventually grew to 13. As a result, Holtzclaw was charged with 36 offenses, including serious ones like criminal sexual violence, rape, forceful oral sodomy, and stalking.
Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree, and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 29, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree, and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 30, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 31, rape in the second degree by instrumentation. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the second degree, and punishment is set at 12 years. Count 32, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree, and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 33, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 34, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 35, defendant procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. Count 36, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. So let me ask the jury, is this your verdict, so say you all?
Yes.
Counsel, would you like to examine the verdict forms?
Not the state,
No, Your Honor. All right. Mr. Holtzclaw, you and your attorneys just come forward. Mr. Holtzclaw, this jury finds you guilty of the various counts. You will be remanded to the custody of the Oklahoma County Sheriff for formal sentencing set January 21st, 2016 at 10 o'clock a.m.
As the judge handed down a staggering sentence of 263 years in prison, Holtzclaw's mental suffering was brutally apparent. The former police officer looked to be going through a profound internal struggle, as after all these years later, he's still fighting and claiming himself innocent. Moving on now, Amber Geiger was reported to enter an apartment directly above her own, which belonged to Botham Jean, a 26-year-old accountant. Prosecutors gave a vivid picture of the scene as Amber Geiger tragically broke into his apartment and, in a horrific turn of events, fatally shot him.
I'm speaking for myself, not even bad for my family. But I love you just like anyone else. And I'm not gonna say I hope you rot and die just like my brother did, but I personally want the best for you. And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you, because I know that's exactly what both of them would want you to do. And the best would be give your life to Christ. Again, I love you as a person. And I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please?
Yes.
On the last day of the murder trial, Jean's younger brother offered forgiveness to Geiger. He extended a meaningful embrace to her as she became overwhelmed with emotion before being escorted to prison. Up next is former Edison cop Michael Dotro, who set fire to the house of his superior officer while the police captain and his family were asleep inside. The family of Captain Mark Andico had to flee the burning house. This footage is of the moment he was sentenced to several years in prison, and there was no remorse on his face.
I also want everyone to understand where I'm coming from with regards to this, especially if there's going to be any appellate review of this sentence. I want those judges to know the sentence to be imposed in this particular case is because Mr. Dotro, through his conduct and his admissions, spanning from 1998 to this year, represents the worst that we could possibly expect from someone in our society. Yes, he's caused very specific damage to Captain Enderble and his family, to Ms. Zog, to Ms. Dotro, to his own parents, to his families, to his brothers. But what he's really done, and what we're going to be left with after he's walking out the door to spend the next third of his life in prison, is allow people a basis to say that our system of justice has no integrity. How could it, when we've allowed this particular individual like him, here in Middlesex County, here in Edison, to do the things that he's done, similar to what we see on the news every day from other parts of the country. Because of what this individual has done, because of him and people like him, victims are afraid to come forward to be part of the criminal justice system and get the relief that they're entitled to from being victimized, because they have no faith in it, because they don't know who to trust. Even more importantly, we have other individuals every day who put on a badge which represents honor, service, and integrity. Without question, go out there every day, leave their family behind to protect an entire community with hopes that they can make it through the day, through the end of their shift, so that they can go back home to their family and lead a normal human being life. Because the life of a police officer is not a normal human being life.
Dotro received 20 years for attempted murder, a first-degree crime, and 10 years for aggravated arson for setting the home on fire. Dotro was also sentenced to 10 years for official misconduct, 5 years for conspiracy to tamper with a witness, and 18 months for conspiracy to retaliate. He will also serve 5 years under parole supervision once released. Up next, a Kansas City police officer named Eric DeValconaire was found guilty in the killing of a black man named Cameron Lamb. Lamb was backing a pickup truck into his garage when he was shot by Eric. Judge James Dale later found Officer Eric guilty after a bench trial took place in November.
The court is further compelled to find beyond a reasonable doubt that when defendant shot and killed Cameron Lamb, number 1, defendant was not acting in lawful self-defense. Number 2, defendant was not acting in lawful defense of Sergeant Schwam. And 3, it being conceded that defendant and Sergeant Schwam were not effecting an arrest of Cameron Lamb or preventing his escape after an arrest, that defendant did not lawfully utilize deadly force as a law enforcement officer under Missouri use of force laws applicable to such officers. The court further finds from the admissible evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that when defendant followed Sergeant Schwam into the backyard of 4154 College and engaged Cameron Lamb, ultimately shooting and killing him, he did so without considering or being aware of the substantial and unjustifiable risks associated with his conduct, including but not limited to the fact that Sergeant Schwam and he were unlawfully on the property, that they were both escalating a situation that previously had de-escalated, and that their actions created or exacerbated the risk that what ultimately occurred would. The court concludes that this conduct was a gross deviation from the standard of care that a reasonable person would exercise in the situation and constituted criminal negligence, as that phrase is defined under Missouri law. Accordingly, as to count 1, in which defendant is charged with the Class C felony of involuntary manslaughter in the first degree, the court finds the defendant guilty of the lesser included offense of involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, a Class E felony. As to count 2, the unclassified felony of armed criminal action, the court finds the defendant guilty. A date for sentencing will be determined after further consultation with counsel. The court will order the preparation of a sentencing assessment report. If the defendant chooses to file a motion for new trial, his deadline for doing so is extended 10 days. I will order the defendant remain free on bond pending sentencing. That will be the court's order. Counsel will withdraw their exhibits. Good luck, everybody.
Eric DeValconaire was sentenced to 3 years for killing Lamb and 6 years for armed criminal actions. Lamb's mother called the decision fair and explained that she was happy with the decision after the mental pain she went through since her son died. Moving on, former Nashville police officer Andrew Delkay shot Daniel Hambrick 3 times in the back after he ran away from a North Nashville traffic stop on July 26th of 2018. When Andrew was presented in court, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter. However, as soon as he pled guilty, chaos erupted in the courtroom as the family of Daniel considered it an excuse.
The powers used across the state and other states too. You can reject this plea deal. You can say no on my watch. I'm not accepting this plea deal. And we're begging you, the citizens are begging you, Judge Monty Watkins, to do the right thing and reject this plea deal. It's not fair. It's not justice. It's not justice. Ms. Hambrick is continuously looking for justice and getting slapped in the face and slapped down and treated in an inhumane way. Not even the common courtesy to say, hey, let's talk about this. We want to talk about settlement. There was an announcement made to her yesterday. Brother D-Day said, I've done it, this is what I'm doing, smile, that's it. We're asking you now, Judge. We're asking you, you're the last one that we can come to, that we can turn to, Judge. You're it. The buck stops there. We're asking you to reject this plea deal, like judges do all the time, in the interest of justice, based on every shred of evidence you've decided that they were going to indict this man on a first-degree premeditated charge. We asked you that. Thank you. Henry has something to say.
All right.
I lost my son because of you! Because of you! He killed himself! I hate you! I hate you! I don't accept your apology because you could have did it, but as you did, I don't accept it. Just look at the tape. What was it your child? It's not my child. What was it your child? You're in a different story. Go ahead. What was it your child? You white mom. I hate you. Roger, I hate you too. You black mom. I hate you.
Miss Hamber.
I hate you.
Miss Hamber.
You told me I'm alive.
Miss Hamber.
And I hate you. I hate you. Devin, you better watch your back in jail. You better watch your back. You hear me? You better be scared. You better be scared, mother. They better take you out of your job because I'm going to do this back shit out of you. Oh, yes, I am. So they better take you all out of here. They better take you out of here. Because I've been through a lot from you. A lot. His friend killed himself because of you. I hate you. You cook up man. You come out.
Okay. Well,
You talk about your parents. You talk about your family. You crazy.
okay. Don't harm anyone. Don't come up here. Just hold him.
We didn't get a chance, y'all. We didn't get a chance, man. 3 years.
However, their protests were up to no use as the judge accepted the plea deal, and under its terms, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison in July of 2021. He served his sentence in Nashville in a facility run by the Davidson County Sheriff's Office.
Here we are. All right, I find you guilty. I find there's a factual basis for the plea, and that the plea is freely and voluntarily given. In case 2019-A-26, I sentence you to a term of 3 years as a standard range 1 offender. That sentence is to serve. There will be no petitions for early release, and that'll be it. All right.
This deal, however, helped Andrew get out of jail much earlier, and he was released on 27th of October of 2022.